Okay, could we get underway now? Diane Swafford has a little announcement she wants to make to you before we get underway. She's been asked to do this.
I hope all of you received your church paper with the honor that we're going to give Dr. Biggs and his wife for being here 30 years next Sunday. The other classes are doing banners because we're so different. We can't. So I'm going to pass around these sheets. If you would write your comment to Dr. Biggs about his service here, his years here. And if you did get your church paper, they emphasized using a verb to describe him. So do with that whatever you will. I will be staying for 11 o'clock church. So if I'm going to start them at one end, if the in-person at the end of either Sunday school or church would find me and give them to me, then I'm getting them back to Sherry Goodwin. And as you all probably know, I sit right down here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you very much. Well, it's a time for remembering for us, of course. So many wonderful memories. We remember our first Sunday here very well, and how great that was for us. Our Allison had just finished 9th grade. Trey, our older son, had just finished 7th grade, and our Jason had just finished the 3rd grade when we came here. They've grown up here, and this, of course, is their home. They hardly remember Texas, except when we go down to see family. Tulsa, Oklahoma is their home, as it is ours too, of course, and we've come to love it so very much. I still remember, old Bishop Millhouse, who appointed me here, and his saying, we're going to do this the old-fashioned way. There will be no trying out. Nowadays, they get to come and interview and do all kinds of things. They get wined and dined and so on. Not in our case. He called us when we were on vacation. John Russell, Dr. Russell, had just been elected a bishop, so this pulpit was going to be open September 1st that summer when Dr. Russell became officially the bishop of Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas. Bishop Millhouse said, if I hear that you've crossed the Red River before the moving date I'm going to give you, I will nullify this appointment. Are we clear about that? I said, sure. He said they're giving parties for Dr. Russell, now Bishop Russell. He's got to go to Lake Junaluska to learn how to be a bishop, all sorts of things. I don't want you in the way. And so finally we were able to make a call or two and find out when the schools were going to start in Tulsa. We didn't want our children to get off, to a late start, get behind, having to uproot and come to a city we knew nothing about at all, really knew nothing. Had never seen the church or anything, and he didn't mention salary. He didn't mention housing. When I got here and got my first paycheck, I discovered that I'd left a church of 3,000 to come to a church of 6,000, and I'd taken a $5,000 cut in pay. That's true. That's true. So we came sight unseen to this church. I had already committed before I was appointed here to speak to all the public school teachers in Beaumont, Texas, for their in-service training. I was supposed to motivate all of them, and it turned out that was the very day that we were going to move to Tulsa. But I said to Gail, well, I can go ahead and make this commitment, and I was first thing on the program that Thursday morning in Beaumont. So they, said the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, and somebody had an invocation, and I was on, and I spoke to all those teachers, and then I hurried home, and we loaded our kids in 2 cars and started to Tulsa, Oklahoma, trying to find our way. We had it all mapped out, of course. We got here after dark that evening, just right at dark. Stopped at a service station on Highway 75 and asked, where is Boston Avenue Methodist Church? And the guy scratched his head and finally said, I think it's that big one down on Boston Avenue. And I said, I don't know where Boston Avenue is. And so he directed us then to Boston Avenue, and we drove up. It was a hot Thursday evening in August, and so nothing happened to be going on that night. Church was locked up tight as could be. We couldn't get in. Kids ran all the way around the building, couldn't find a door that was open. So I had a phone number for the chair of the board, Carl Leonard, and I called Mr. Leonard, and he said, "Where are you?" And this was long before the days of cell phones, so wherever else we had stopped to use a phone, I don't remember where that was now. And he told us, turn right, left, go, and I'll be at the parsonage when you get there. So we found it, and he was sitting in the driveway, unlocked the front door, and we went in and slept that night. And the next morning, Gail was waiting for the movers, and I rushed around getting our 3 kids into the schools. Jason went to Barnard Elementary, and Trey and Allison both went to Edison Intermediate School. They were in Edison Intermediate. So we got them all situated, and Mr. Bost arrived, chair of the PPR committee, and drove Gail and me then downtown here to get our first look in the building and to meet the staff. It was interesting. Bishop Milhouse had said, "I do not want Boston Avenue people to see you until you walk into the pulpit. I don't want them to see you till you walk into the pulpit that first Sunday in September." And he'd let us move finally, to get our kids in school. So there was one Sunday at the end of August there. And I said, "What are we supposed to do that Sunday?" And he said, "Oh my goodness, you can't go to. I don't want Boston Avenue to see you till you walk in the pulpit, but I don't want them to hear that you went to some other Methodist church either. And instead of coming to worship with them." So I said, "Okay." We had a mobile oil company travel guide. You remember the mobile travel guides? And we looked in it and finally discovered a place called Claremore, Oklahoma. It seemed to be, out of Tulsa, but close enough. And it suggested that you eat lunch at Hammett House and go to the Will Rogers Museum. Hey, what could be more Oklahoma than that? So we got up that morning and drove out to Claremore. The First Methodist Church was still downtown at that time. It's moved out up on the hill now, just past the Will Rogers Memorial, but not then. It was still downtown. It was sort of hard to get to on a little insignificant sort of street. So we walked in as they were singing the opening hymn. We just sat down on the back row. Where the door was, we sat in, all 5 of us. And so the minister went on with the whole service, and then when he started out, he walked down the aisle giving the benediction. And he ended up, amen, right at the door. So we were the 5 closest to the door, so we started out. And he said to our Allison, "I don't think I've ever seen you before, young lady. What's your name?" She said, "Allison Biggs." He said, "I'm glad to meet you, Allison Biggs. And you, young men, I'm Trey Biggs. How are you, Trey Biggs? And you, young men, I'm Jason Biggs. How are you, Jason Biggs? And you, madam, I'm Gail Biggs. How are you, Gail Biggs? And you, sir?" And I said, "I'm Muzon Biggs." And he said, "Oh, my Lord." He got down on one knee. I kid you not. He got down on one knee and said, "You are the new men at Boston Avenue. What are you doing here?" And I said, "Please, Grady, get up. I didn't know him, but his name was in the bulletin, Grady McCullough. And then Grady, get up. And he said, "You should have been preaching, not me." And he didn't even know me. But he'd read in the paper I was the new guy, so that's the way we got started in Oklahoma. The next Sunday we got to meet all of you. And so that was wonderful. Okay, 1 Kings chapter 12 is where we left off last week. We're going to read some fairly long segments today, but we're also going to skip a good bit because these 2 books, 1st and 2nd Kings, are about one basically mess-up king after another, and these 2 books together shift from the northern kingdom to the south, back to the north, then south, north, south. And so if you're not paying close attention to the names, you may get a little confused. Okay, is he now telling us about something going on in the northern tribes or something going on in the southern tribes? But this one was a failure, and that one was a failure, and this one was a failure, and that one was a failure. That's sort of what goes on in these two books, and we will not deal with all of them by any means. Only those that typify the direction this 400 years of Kings was taking, and how God was responding to that all along the way. So I'll try to keep us clear as we go along, whether we're now in the north. And remember, the northern tribes took the name Israel, and the southern tribes became Judah. Judah and Israel. And I'll try to keep us straight there. All right, let's pray, and then we'll get underway here. God, thank you for your book and for the faith community that produced it, for your willingness to work through people who were very limited by their own times and places, and yet people who could hear clearly enough what you were saying that we've come to know you. We're grateful for those passages that we read and know we're reading something that's forever true about you and us. Ask you to help us today to read and understand. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. Chapter 12. We've just read that Solomon has died and that his son Rehoboam is becoming king. And it will help you a lot if you follow along in your own Bible or use one on the back of the pew there. It's exactly the same translation I'm using. You'll have no trouble following along. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had come to Shechem to make him king. Now, remember that being king was a religious ceremony as well. And it still is in numbers of places in the world where they still have kings. The church and the state get all tied up together. And there is no temple yet on the top of Mount Moriah that is as acknowledged as much as the old shrines. Gradually, greater and greater loyalty will be paid to the beautiful new temple that Solomon has had built. But these old religious sites still are very important, and Shechem was certainly one of those. So Rehoboam chooses to go to Shechem so that he could be made king. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard of it, for he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon, then Jeroboam returned from Egypt. Now you recall, Jeroboam was the oldest surviving son of Solomon, of David and Solomon then in that lineage, and he should have been next up. But instead it's going to fall to Solomon's son Rehoboam. Jeroboam has fled to Egypt. He's not nearly so impressed with Rehoboam's abilities as he was with Solomon's, so he comes back from Egypt. And they sent and called him, and Jeroboam and all the assembly of Israel came and said to Rehoboam, "Your father made our yoke heavy. Now therefore lighten the hard service of your father and his heavy yoke that he placed on us, and we will serve you." Now, I pointed out to you last week, but I just remind you this week, one does not build such a magnificent temple and an even more, in some ways, certainly bigger palace without it costing lots of money, lots of labor, and very labor-intensive in those days. Skilled artisans. I've told you, though these two buildings didn't take that long, many of the great palaces in Europe and the beautiful churches in Europe were under construction for 200-300 years. They just kept adding on and adding on, doing a little more. So it was not unusual for a stonemason, for example, to work on one church all of his life, never see it finished. 40 years he might work, chiseling away on one church, never see it finished. So this word that comes to Rehoboam is, okay, we've had a long period of high taxes, being compelled to work on the temple or the palace. We need a time of rest here, a respite from all of this hardship. So Rehoboam, said to them, "Go away for 3 days, then come again to me." So the people went away. He wants to think about it. Give me 72 hours here. Then King Rehoboam took counsel with the older men who had attended his father Solomon while he was still alive, saying, "How do you advise me to answer this people?" Now these are the older advisors, his father's cabinet, if you would. And they answered him, "If you will be a servant to this people today and serve them," remember what Samuel had told the people when they demanded a king, "Kings take." But through Israel's history, they prayed for, hoped for a servant king. A servant king. And we believe that one finally came. It was Jesus of Nazareth. He never sat on the throne in Jerusalem, but we believe he was that descendant of David who did finally get all things right. So instead of making the people serve you, Rehoboam, serve them. Speak good words to them when you answer them. They will be your servants forever. But he disregarded the advice that the older men gave him and consulted with the young men who had grown up with him and now attended him. Okay, so he chooses his generation. These are children of privilege, you can be sure. Rich runs with rich. Educated run with educated. So these are young people very much like himself. They've had benefit of money. Probably no one ever telling them what they could not do, what was right, what was wrong. They'd never heard the word no. He said to them, "What do you advise that we answer this people who've said to me, 'Lighten the yoke that your father put on us'?" The young men who had grown up with him said to him, "Thus you should say to this people who spoke to you, 'Your father made our yoke heavy, but you must lighten it for us.' Thus you should say to them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's loins.' That is, I'm tougher than my dad. Now, whereas my father had on you a heavy yoke, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, I will discipline you with scorpions." So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the 3rd day, as he had requested. As the king had said, "Come to me again the 3rd day." The king answered the people harshly. He disregarded the advice that the older men had given him and spoke to them according to the advice of the young men. "My father made your yoke heavy, I will add to your yoke. My father disciplined you with whips, I will discipline you with scorpions." Skip to verse 16. When all Israel saw that the king would not listen to them, the people answered the king, "What share do we have in David?" Now, of course, David's been dead a long time. But nonetheless, we have no inheritance in the son of Jesse. Remember, David was one of 8 boys, sons of Jesse. I mean, what is that to us? And you understand what they're saying now? We don't belong to Judah. We are not from the tribe of Judah. So why should we still be joined to you? That's what he's saying. "To your tents, O Israel, look now to your own house, O David." So Israel went away to their tents, but Rehoboam reigned over the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah. So that quickly, after the death of Solomon, you have the split again. North and south, 10 against 2, 2 against 10. You see? And they would never be reunited after this. Never. I'm just jumping ahead, but the northern tribes, you recall, will be devastated in years to come by the Assyrians. Raped, plundered, burned out until they became a mixed-blooded people and were considered the lost tribes of Israel. Only Judah would survive. But it'll take a long, long time for that to happen. At this point, 2 nations, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. All right, skip down to verse 19. "So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day." And here again you can tell that this scroll is being written some years later. Over and over, he will say, this is still happening even till today. This is happening even till today. So as he's writing this scroll, he's saying, guess what? We're still divided. Still divided when this gets written. Let's go on, verse 20. "When all Israel heard that Jeroboam had returned," now Israel now ceases to be the 12 tribes. Remember, it's back to just 10. Israel's 10, Judah the 2 in the south. So now it's not all 12 tribes, just the 10 in the north. When all Israel heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent and called him to the assembly and made him king over all Israel, that is the north, Rehoboam in the south. There was no one who followed the house of David except the tribe of Judah alone. Judah has been subdivided. It's two tribes in the south. They follow David's direct descendant, Rehoboam, not the north. Okay, verse 21, when Rehoboam came to Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. That's where you get the two, Judah and Benjamin. Judah, you see, is actually the tribe of Joseph. Joseph and Benjamin, two sons of favored wife. Okay, he assembled all the house of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, 180,000 chosen troops to fight against the house of Israel in the north, to restore the kingdom to Rehoboam, son of Solomon. He's going to try to put them back together by force. But the word of God came to Shemaiah, the man of God. Say to King Rehoboam of Judah, son of Solomon, and to all the house of Judah and Benjamin, and to the rest of the people, thus says the I am who I am, you shall not go up and fight against your kindred, the people of Israel. Let everyone go home, for this thing is from me. So they heeded the word of the Lord and went home again according to the word of the Lord. So you see that the prophets and priests still have a lot of sway in Israel. They can often swing the people one way or the other even more than the king, if he doesn't happen to have the ability of a David or a Solomon. And so in this case, the king wants to go fight the north and see if he can't bring them under his rule again. The prophet, the holy man of that era, said, don't do it. God doesn't want this battle to take place. Okay, verse 25, then Jeroboam, now he's the king now in the north, built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and resided there. He went out from there and built Penuel. Then Jeroboam said to himself, pick up with verse 27, if this people continue to go up to offer sacrifices in the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem, the heart of the people will turn again to their master king Rehoboam of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam of Judah. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. Calves were symbols of fertility. Okay? So what is he saying? Now, if the people in the north honor the temple in Jerusalem, they will have a certain connection there to the tribes in the south. And they may decide at some point to let Rehoboam be their king. So I've got to build them a new holy place. And he decides to do it with 2 golden calves. Okay. He said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Here are your Elohim, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. So he set one of these golden calves in Bethel. Remember, Bethel was one of those villages unearthed, dug up, that missioner used in his book, The Source. He set one in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan, and this thing became a sin. Look at verse 31. He also made houses on high places and appointed priests from among all the people who were not Levites. Okay. So what he's done is to put one of these golden calves on his southernmost border and one on his northernmost border. Now remember, when you have all 12 tribes, they normally speak of the tribe of Dan, which was just on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. Remember, we say sea because the Bible calls it a sea. It's really a lake. It's a freshwater lake. The tribe of Dan was here. And the southernmost of the 12 tribes went all the way down to Beersheba in the Negev desert. But now that they've been divided again, the northern 10 come down just to the outskirts of Jerusalem. So you have from Dan to here, not from Dan to Beersheba. So Bethel and Ai, the two unearthed villages that missioner used, they were both right near Jerusalem. And more important than Jerusalem, before David started the new capital city. Bethel and Ai were more important. So Jeroboam decides, I can't have them going up to Mount Moriah. If they do, their loyalty might switch again to Rehoboam. So I'll build them two fancy new places, this beautiful gold calf up here for the north, and if they want them to go south, not to Jerusalem, not up Mount Moriah to Solomon's temple, but Bethel. Okay? But both, of course, are not pleasing to God. They are choosing the old gods and goddesses of fertility. And around the planet Earth, there's evidence that people of every size, shape, and description had gods and goddesses of fertility. It was so important, of course, that every woman in those difficult eras produced babies, every cow have calves, every ewe have lambs, and so forth. It was important that they knew when to plant the seeds once they learned how to plant and cultivate and harvest, without being hunters and gatherers. Once they learned how to domesticate animals and to cultivate their own plants and produce from them, then the cycle was very, very important. Even when they were hunters and gatherers, of course, the cycles of the year determine whether the animals are coming down from the mountains or going up to the mountains. I mean, is it now summer and the migrations are this way, or is it coming winter and they're this way? When do the birds fly? When do the geese come, the ducks, or whatever? Okay, you can understand this. So all over the world, those fertility cults did very well. Very, very well. And when you go to the great museums of the world and you look at the pottery and so on that have been unearthed, you find that they called them by different names, but they all had something to do with fertility. And that's the direction that Jeroboam is going again. Golden calves in the north and the south of the 10 tribes that were under his purview. Okay. The other thing was, going all the way back to the time of Moses, he believed God was saying that his tribe, Moses, Aaron, and their sister Miriam, those three, their family should be the priests. And we have a whole scroll called Leviticus, coming from the root Levi. The tribe of Levi, the Levites will be priests, so the scroll of Leviticus is about things priestly, how to priest dress themselves, how do they conduct themselves, and so on. So Jeroboam has not only set up these two gods of fertility, he's also choosing priests from among tribes not Levi. Bad thing. As far as this historian is concerned, a bad thing. Okay, let's skip down to chapter 13. Yes, sir. Yeah, Kenny? Okay. I'm not positive that this thing here means the split. I think it means this oracle, if you would, that this word is from God. This word that I don't want you fighting your cousins. I don't want war, is what I think is what's happening here. Shemaiah is the holy man. He says God doesn't want this. This thing is from God. I don't think God was pleased about the split, but I think he would have been less pleased about war. Cousins killing cousins. Yeah. Okay. Chapter 13. While Jeroboam was standing by the altar to offer incense, his new holy places that he's set up at Dan and Bethel, a man of God came out of Judah by the word of Yahweh to Bethel and proclaimed against the altar by the word of the I am who I am. Okay, you following? A member of the priestly group from the south dares go up to the north and point an accusing finger at these golden calves. That's what's happening. proclaimed against the altar by the word of the I am who I am, and said, O altar, altar, thus says the I am who I am. A son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by name, and he shall sacrifice on you the priests of the high places who offer incense on you, and human bones shall be burned on you. Remember, the Jews might have participated in human sacrifice, but if they did, it was never with the blessing of God. The book doesn't tell you they ever directly participated. And in fact, when David founded Jerusalem, as I told you, and they found that the Jebusites, to whom this hill had belonged, had human sacrifice in one of their valleys, the one of Hinnom, they decided to make that the city dump. It was verboten. Do not get close to this valley where humans have been sacrificed. So here, this priest from the south is pointing an accusing finger at Jeroboam and his golden calves and saying, this is just the first step toward what everybody else does that finally ends up in human sacrifice. Now stop and think about that. The whole system of sacrifice, and again, this was practiced all over the planet, not just in the Middle East. I mean, archaeologists have discovered human sacrifice in the Andes Mountains. They have unearthed, sometimes have dug them out of ice and snow, humans that were sacrificed in the Andes by the Incas. In Ireland, in the peat bogs, they have found people who were sacrificed to the gods. So don't point an accusing finger only at people in the Middle East. It was happening all over the planet. Here's the idea. If you offer the best you've got to God, you're a shepherd. You bring the little lamb that is completely without blemish, the one you love more than any other, and you offer it, and still it does not rain, or your wife does not get pregnant, or your cows are not producing, or whatever, that they tied to that old cycle of fertility, then you have to offer something you love even more. And that became a person. You offer a person. A child, adult, some of them, decided, how about a foreigner? How about if we catch a foreigner and, sacrifice him or her? That was done down in the Central America. Some of the Spanish conquistadors and so on became the next sacrifice. And there's stories about Cortez and those who followed him, literally cutting people's chests open and lifting a beating heart out of this Spaniard and offering it up to their gods. So this was done around the planet. And this holy man from the south is saying to the people of the north, this is just the first step to human sacrifice. These gods and goddesses of fertility, and human sacrifice is such an abomination to our God. But human bones shall be burned here. It will come to that. That's what he's predicting. He gave... Sorry? Yes. Did all of you hear the question? How does this relate then to God sending His own Son, who was a person? He was a person. And I think a part of that answer is that God was saying, this is it, once and for all. But the Bible is pretty clear that God didn't do to Jesus what got done to Him. God just offered Him up. I'm working on sermon titles for next year already, and one of the lections for next year, appropriate, right there at Easter time, is what happened 7 weeks later when the people all got back to Jerusalem. The Jews came for their next big festival called the Feast of Weeks, a week of weeks after Passover. And when they got back, they had heard all these rumors that the one whom they knew had been crucified, somebody had put in a tomb, and Sunday morning a stone was rolled away, and he wasn't there, and now he had appeared to this one and that one and the 12 and so on. We've got to find out what happened. And somebody said, grab that fisherman. If anybody knows, he ought to know what happened. And Simon spoke. And the way he described it was, this Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified. So Peter saw Jesus as being lifted up. You know, he said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all people to me. But it was the sins of humans who killed him. God offered him up. We could have accepted. One of the great Methodist preachers of England back in war times wrote the little book on the will of God. And in there talks about the primary and secondary will of God. And he contends that the primary will of God would have been that everyone would have seen that He, God, was in fact present in Jesus of Nazareth in a way He never had been in a human being before. And would have accepted, this is what God is like, this is the face of God, this is the heart of God, and would have trusted that they all had the favor of God. God wanted good to come to all of them, and have done what Jesus said, do agape, put yourself out for the well-being of the other. That was God's will, primary will, that the whole world will embrace the gift of my Son. This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. But if they didn't, if we didn't, then love would be shown no matter what. And of course, the world didn't embrace Him. Some did, many others did not. And so God's love was going to be shown no matter what, and if that meant being faithful, Jesus being faithful all the way to trial and death, then that's what happened. So it wasn't God's offering up Jesus. It was God's sort of saying, this is who I am. This is what my heart is. This is what I look like in my behavior toward you. What say you about Jesus of Nazareth? And they killed him. Okay. But I don't believe it was God. I don't believe God was ever pleased with human sacrifice in that sense. But the Bible also says there is no greater love than this, that one should give up his life for his friends. So a self-giving is one thing. The taking of a life is something very different. Okay? All right. This is what the holy men saying. These golden calves that Jeroboam has provided for you, just a first step down that road to human sacrifice, which they had seen as the most horrible thing imaginable. He gave a sign the same day, saying, this is the sign that Yahweh has spoken. The altar shall be torn down, and the ashes that are on it shall be poured out. And that's what he's telling them to do. Tear down this altar that Jeroboam has set up. Now when the king heard what the man of God cried out against the altar at Bethel, Jeroboam stretched out his hand from the altar, saying, seize him! But the hand that he stretched out against him withered, so that he could not draw it back to himself. The altar also was torn down, and the ashes poured out from the altar, according to the sign that the man of God had given by the word of Yahweh. The king said to the man of God, entreat now the favor of Yahweh, your Elohim, and pray for me, so that my hand may be restored to me. So the man of God entreated Yahweh, and the king's hand was restored to him, and became as it was before. Okay, so God is still present, still caring, doing two things. One, saying sin has repercussions, has consequences, but grace is offered. Grace is offered, whether it will be embraced or not. Okay, skip with me to verse 33. Even after this event, okay, so Jeroboam, when he strikes out at God's messenger and ends up with a withered hand, begs his holy man to ask God to forgive him. And you notice he doesn't say, Yahweh my Elohim, but Yahweh your Elohim. Call on him. And the holy man does. The hand is restored. But look at verse 33. Even after this event, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way. These physicians can tell you when we're really scared, we'll do almost anything we're told, but we got a month down the road and we revert to old habits if we're not very careful. We get over being afraid, don't we? How many heart patients have you known that went out and bought them a treadmill? I read one time the average stationary bike has about 25 miles on it. Average treadmill, just look in the want ads. They're available for sale all the time. People who bought them, and they're like new. Now, we get over our fear. We go back to our old ways if we're not careful. That's what Jeroboam does, gets his hand restored. So, even after this event, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil way, but made priest for the high places. Remember, all these fertility cults were built at the top of the hill so that people could see them and come to them. Any who wanted to be priest, he consecrated for the high places. I told you that the fellow who cut my hair from the time I could toddle in the door, my mother would get me to the barber shop and give me a little push, and then she would go on with whatever she was doing in this little town. The barbers joked about it years later that I never failed to climb up in the chair when it was my turn. I learned how to see who was ahead of me and who when it was my turn. This guy cut my hair, all those years. And then one weekend, he went to a big revival. And he got baptized, saved, called to preach, and ordained in one night. Some people complain about how long it takes for us to make preachers in the Methodist Church, but we're not going to do it in one night, I can assure you. But when you start making priests out of anyone and everybody who wants to be one, you're going to have problems. This matter became sin to the house of Jeroboam so as to cut it off and destroy it from the face of the earth. See how quickly things are falling apart here. Let's go on to 14. At that time, Abijah, son of Jeroboam, fell sick. So Jeroboam's gone back to his old ways, making anybody that wants to be a priest up at these shrines at the top of the hills. Jeroboam said to his wife, "Go disguise yourself so that it will not be known that you are the wife of Jeroboam, the king's wife. In other words, go to Shiloh. For the prophet Ahijah is there, who said of me that I should be king over this people. Take with you 10 loaves, some cakes, a jar of honey. Go to him. He'll tell you what shall happen to the child." Take the preacher a gift. See what he can do for us here. Skip to the latter part of verse 4. Now Ahijah could not see, for his eyes were dim because of his age. This is the old holy man. But Yahweh said to Ahijah, "The wife of Jeroboam is coming to inquire of you concerning her son, for he is sick. Thus and thus you shall say to her." The storyteller doesn't tell you what that was yet. God told the holy man what to say, not you and me. So when she came, she pretended to be another woman. But when Ahijah heard the sound of her feet as she came in at the door, he said, "Come in, wife of Jeroboam. Why do you pretend to be another? For I am charged with heavy tidings for you." In other words, this is not going to be good. Go, tell Jeroboam. Skip down to verse 9. You get the heart of it. "You have done evil above all those who were before you, and have gone and made for yourself other Elohim, and cast images," these golden calves, "provoking me to anger, and have thrust me behind your back. Therefore I will bring evil upon the house of Jeroboam." Skip to verse 12. "Therefore set out, go to your house. When your feet enter the city, the child shall die." Verse 15, "Yahweh will strike Israel as a reed is shaken in the water. He will root up Israel," these are the northern tribes, "out of this good land that he gave to their ancestors, and scatter them beyond the Euphrates." And remember, this author is writing a long time after, and he knows this is going to happen. It's going to happen. the Assyrians are going to come, and they control what is now part of modern-day Iraq. Later, the Babylonians would assert themselves and take back a part of that land. But at the time the northern tribes were destroyed, Assyria, of course, which included the modern nation of Syria, but also a part of the modern nation of Iraq. So they controlled the territory up to the Euphrates. These northern tribes have been so evil, they will be uprooted. That's what he's predicting. Because they have made their sacred poles, remember these sacred poles were symbolic of the male sex organ and therefore a part of the fertility cults, provoking Yahweh to anger. He will give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, which he sinned and which he caused Israel to commit. Okay, but notice again here in verse 16. Notice the language that's used. He will give Israel up. Doesn't mean that God will do all these horrible things to them, but He will step back and let them face the consequences of their sin. All right? His heart broken. These are children of His whom He loves. He will step back, give them up, and the Assyrians will deal with them. Not yet, but He will. Okay. He will give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, which he sinned and which he caused Israel to commit. I mean, they're following their king. Then Jeroboam's wife got up and went away, and she came to Tirzah. As she came to the threshold of the house, the child died, just as she was told. Skip down to verse 20. The time that Jeroboam reigned was 22 years. Then he slept with his ancestors, and his son Nadab succeeded him. All right? Now, we skip back to the south. Verse 21. Now Rehoboam, son of Solomon, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city that Yahweh had chosen out of all the tribes of Israel to put His name there. Remember, Jerusalem was a compromise, if you would, a new capital, right on the border of northern tribes and southern tribes. And God was pleased that all 12 tribes were together and that a house was being built there where His name would be revered, honored. Okay, so God was pleased about that. Now they're separate again, of course. Verse 22. Judah, means all the people, not one specific person. Judah did what was evil in the sight of Yahweh. They provoked Him to jealousy with their sins they committed, more than all that their ancestors had done. For they also built for themselves high places, pillars, and sacred poles on every high hill and under every green tree. There were also male temple prostitutes in the land. They committed all the abominations of the nations that Yahweh drove out before the people of Israel. In other words, they're acting just like all the Canaanite tribes before them. They are no better than anybody else in the land of Canaan. No better. God has sent them in to be a people of faith, with the 10 Commandments, a guide for the way they're to conduct themselves toward each other, and they're no better than the people they've displaced. Verse 25. So here comes a consequence from Egypt. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, King Shishak of Egypt came up against Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the house of Yahweh and the treasures of the king's house. He took everything. He also took away all the shields of gold that Solomon has made. All right. What do kings do? They take. And stronger ones take even from weaker ones. So the sins of the south. First, let's go back. Sins of the north, they will be decimated by some power that looms nameless at this point. Some power from the north will decimate them. And the southern tribes, they got to deal with the old kingdoms south of them, Egypt. And when this king Shishak wants to, he can march into town and take everything of value out of these 2 magnificent buildings that he wants. So look at verse 30. They couldn't whip Egypt. They couldn't whip Assyria. Just beat up on each other. Verse 30, there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam continually. That is, north tribes, south tribes, north tribes. Rehoboam slept with his ancestors and was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. Last line, his son Abijam succeeded him. It isn't going to get any better, folks. Okay, but we're going to do more skipping now for just a little bit. So follow me here. Let's go into... Yes, sir. Yes, it is a lost document. Yes, thank you. I didn't mention that specifically. Where it talks about it's in verse 29. The rest of all the acts of Rehoboam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Judah? And the only ones we have are 1st and 2nd Kings, and later 1st and 2nd Chronicles will go back and sort of clean up the stories in 1st and 2nd Kings. They remove all the warts from the photographs. They make, they forget about David's sending a man into battle to be killed because he'd already impregnated his wife and so on. I mean, they really clean up the stories in 1st and 2nd Chronicles. But this specific reference we no longer have. Yeah, good point. Okay, chapter 15. Abijam began to reign over Judah. He reigned for 3 years in Jerusalem. Verse 3, he committed all the sins that his father did before him. His heart was not true to the I am who I am, his Elohim, like the heart of his father David. I mean, David made mistakes, but he didn't worship pagan gods. So skip to verse 7, last part of verse 7. There was war between Abijam and Jeroboam. That's north and south again. Abijam slept with his ancestors. His son Asa succeeded him. But look what happens here to one king, Asa. Start with verse 11. Asa did what was right in the sight of Yahweh, as his father, not literally his father, but going back several generations, David had done. Okay. He put away the male temple prostitutes out of the land and removed all the idols that his ancestors had made. Look at this. He also removed his mother, Maacah, from being queen mother because she had made an abominable image for Asherah, one of the female goddesses of fertility. Astarte was one. Asherah was another. Asa cut down this beautiful image his mother had put there and burned it at the Wadi Kidron. Okay, that's the one right outside the east gate. Come out the east gate of the temple, go across the little Wadi Kidron, and you're on the Mount of Olives. Those who are going in February will see this very clearly. But even this is a sad note in verse 14, but even so, the high places were not taken away. He did a lot of good, but not enough. Verse 16, so there was war between Asa and King Baasha. We haven't heard of him yet, but when it shifts back to the north, we will, of Israel all their days. So still, north and south fighting, north and south fighting. There's a border there, like between Israel and Lebanon today, Israel and Gaza today, North and South Korea today. You have to watch it all the time. And they fight a little, and then they withdraw, and they fight a little and withdraw. It just goes on for centuries. Verse 24. Then Asa slept with his ancestors and was buried with his ancestors in the city of his father David, and his son Jehoshaphat succeeded him. All right. Now, if it's okay with you, we're going to skip, and get to maybe the worst of them all. Ahab and his wife Jezebel. So, if you want to read all the material in between, of course, help yourself. We've done it twice before together, but this time we're just hitting highlights. So let's go to chapter 16, verse 29. Latter part of the verse. Ahab, son of Omri, began to rule over Israel. Verse 30. Ahab, son of Omri, did evil in the sight of Yahweh more than all who were before him. They're just getting worse and worse. This is the worst of them all. Look in the latter part of verse 31, about midway. he took as his wife Jezebel, daughter of King Ethbaal. Now that ought to be a dead giveaway. This is the daughter of a man who in his own name has the chief god of fertility in it, Baal. As children, I was taught Baal, but it has two syllables, and our better translations all show that now. Baal. She was daughter of King Ethbaal of the Sidonians. Remember where Sidon is? Tyre and Sidon are two port cities in Lebanon, so just immediately north of the northern tribes, but heathen. That's the point. They're heathen and pagan, and that's where Ahab goes to find a wife. And he went and served Baal and worshipped him. Remember, our word worship in English comes from an older Anglican word, worthship. Worthship. To what do you ascribe supreme worth? That's what worship is about. Do you come and sing hymns to the God of Jesus Christ, Father of the beloved Son? Or do you sing hymns to somebody else? To whom do you pray? And so on. That's what worship is all about. Deciding what is important enough to receive worship from you. Verse 32, he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. All right, and in Jesus' time, about 800 years later, the people of Samaria will be the mixed bloods who've been overrun by the Assyrians and have ceased to be a separate people. Verse 33, Ahab also made a sacred pole, one of these male sexual images. Ahab did more to provoke the anger of Yahweh, Elohim of Israel, than had all the kings of Israel who were before him. So if you've got the worst king ever, then you need a holy man who's bigger, stronger than most. And that one is going to be Elijah. Okay, look at chapter 17. We just read a few verses. We'll be just about through. Now, Elijah, the Tishbite of Tishbe, hence his name, in Gilead, said to Ahab, as Yahweh, remember the I am who I am, Elohim of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. All right, let's remind ourselves where Gilead is. We've already had a terrible battle fought over here between David and Absalom's armies in Gilead on the east side of the Jordan River. We know that some of the tribal groups chose not to cross the river, but rather to settle on the east side. And so Elijah came from, he's a Jew, he's an Israelite, but he comes from a smaller clan of one of the 10, the Tishbes. So he's a Tishbite from Gilead, and he dares to cross over and start saying, it's going to stop raining, and it's not going to rain again till I say it's going to rain. Now, you better be strong when you take on a king and start giving him words like that. Everybody needed rain, and it's not going to rain again till I say it's going to rain. So we're going to come down to a big confrontation, of course, between Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Remember? All right, so I'm going to put a mark there, August 22. Let me just mention to you that starting next Sunday, our class will also be counted and compared to itself, not to any other class, to itself for the next 4-week period. So we really hope you will be here in Sunday school and ready to go to work with us as we begin a new fall academic semester and so on. We'll pick right up there at chapter 17. If you haven't been to church yet, don't rush away. We have an opportunity to come to the table of the Lord.